Many years at Wooddale Church in Eden Prairie, and beyond that has served with distinction as the president of the National Association of Evangelicals in 2 different stints, and he's leaned on for his wisdom and guidance. Personally, I've appreciated his encouragement even in our own ministry. He has loaned staff members to us as board members. The late Fred McCormick was with us for probably 10 years on the board of directors and served very well. We've also had the use of their facility from time to time for our events. So this is a man who has a heart for the church writ large and is a great observer, as well as a personal mentor to pastors to this day. And so, Leith, we're grateful for your presence this morning to address that subject. Now what? Leading into tomorrow. Let's greet him with a warm MCMA welcome.
Thank you. So he didn't mention that much of my life I've been a classroom teacher, so let's make this a classroom, all right? All right, I'll take no votes as consent. All right, so what does a class always begin with? A quiz, right? Okay, you don't have to say your answer out loud, but let's see what kind of grade you get. Here's the question. What is the best-selling book of all time that was originally written in English? All right. If your answer is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, then you get an A+. 200 million copies in print, more than Harry Potter, more than any other book ever published. And whether you've ever read it or not, you have probably at least heard the opening lines of A Tale of Two Cities. So listen to them again. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epic of belief. It was the epic of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. So the point of all this is it kind of depends on where you are and what your situation and what your circumstances are. And it's the best of times or it's the worst of times. So if just recently you lost your job and your home and you declared bankruptcy, it's the worst of times. If in today's mail you get an anonymous envelope and the only thing in it is a lottery number that somebody has sent to you, and you have just discovered today that you've just won $1 billion. So I don't know what you started with today, but now you're $1 billion richer, and you think it is the best of times. But the question in both contexts is, now what are you going to do? Now that you're bankrupt, what are you going to do? Now that you're a billionaire, what are you going to do with $1 billion? So let's narrow that down. Let's talk about it in terms of Christianity and the church. Suppose you Google, where is the Church of Jesus Christ growing? What country most quickly in all of the world? And honestly, it would not be my first answer. The number one answer is Iran, followed by China, followed by countries of Africa. So and then you do the other side of the question, and that is, where is the Church of Jesus Christ declining the most today? And you will get North America and Europe and New Zealand and Australia. But, it's not quite fair to grow 20% in Iran, where the number starts out small, is quite different from countries like Australia and the United States, where there are millions of people who claim and profess to be Christians. But in every case, it's now what? Well, what are we going to do now for the future? Well, we're leaders in America, and that is the context of my talking with you, although, as Tim mentioned, I kind of live in the other side of the international world. I hold the founder's chair at World Vision International, so we're in 100 countries around the world. And it's amazing the things that God is doing in all these places around the globe. But what's happening to churches and Christianity in the United States? Well, we're in the midst of major changes. So the circumstances of the 20th century and the circumstances of the 21st century, even though we're only a quarter of a way into it, the reality is it's very different today than it was in the last century, and especially because of the pandemic. And as far as churches are concerned, especially because more and more people have come to church online rather than showing up physically. And many congregations are aging. One statistician claims, I'm not sure if the number's right, but that there are 7,500 churches in the United States that close every year. 7,500. I mean, that's kind of a breathtaking number. Yeah, well, that may or may not be accurate, but it's, again, how you understand all of that. So, online? Yeah, well, schools are online as well. So, you can be a child in kindergarten, and you can go to kindergarten online. And you can stay online until you get your PhD and never go into a classroom. So you can get your entire education online. That was not possible 25 years ago or 50 years ago. Colleges and universities across America are changing, including here in Minnesota. So St. Cloud State University has maybe 10,000 students less than it had 5 or 10 years ago. And in terms of the demographics, if you take the number of people that were born 18 years ago and are going to college, well, the last big year was 18 years ago this year. So a lot of colleges are saying our enrollment's up. Yeah, well, get their numbers next year, because it's at the end of the cliff, because next year we'll say 18 years ago, they weren't born. It's very hard to recruit freshmen that weren't born 18 years ago. So it changes how it all works. And fewer churches, is that a terrible sign? Well, fewer churches don't always mean fewer people. For example, if you go back to the year 1900, there were 100,000 school districts in the United States. Today, there are 15,000 school districts in the United States. We've lost 85,000 school districts, and we have millions more students than were in school 100 years ago. It's just that the one-room schoolhouse has disappeared. School districts have consolidated, and now we have school districts that have thousands, if not tens of thousands of students. So it's how you understand. And then there's the thing about pastors quitting. It is true. It is true. Pastors are stressed and quitting, and sadly so. But so are police officers and firefighters and physicians and electricians. So last week I heard in the news we estimate about 80,000 electricians per year in the United States. So if you have a light that doesn't work, you need to get it fixed like on Monday, because there may not be an electrician available the next time you want to call and get somebody. We have an oncoming enormous shortage of electricians because, well, circumstances have changed. Or 1 month ago yesterday, Christianity Today gave a report that came from the research of the Barna organization. It is fascinating. I'm going to have to read the statistics on this, so hang in there with me. It has to do with what ages people are when they come to church and how much they come to church, okay? So let's start out with Gen Z. Gen Z, that born from 1997 to 2007, so this is a generation of people that are currently in their 20s, and they go to church on average 23 times per year. Got it? All right. Gen X, these are people 45 to 60 years old. They come to church 19 times a year. How about baby boomers? Post-World War II, currently in their 60s and 70s. Baby boomers and their elders average 17 services per year. So the reality is, the younger people are, generationally in the United States, the more likely they are to come to church more frequently, and the older they are, the less likely they are to come to church frequently. that there's a spiritual renewal that's going on. Just check out, for example, what's happening at Texas A&M, where there's a revival going on with thousands and thousands of students that are involved in it. It is an upheaval. It's very different from what we expect and thought. And some of us are saying, yeah, well, that's not my experience. That's not where I am. That's not who I'm dealing with. So I want us to get practical about how do we lead wherever we are. But before we do that, we need to remember biblically that this question about now what, this is not a new question. It was in the Bible. So Moses, he led 3 million people out of slavery in Egypt. Now they're out in the Sinai desert, and I'm imagining he turns to his colleague and brother Aaron and says, we have 3 million people here and they want dinner. Now what are we going to do? How are we going to feed these people? Or he goes up on Mount Sinai and he encounters God, direct contact with God, and God takes some stones and with his finger he writes the 10 Commandments. I mean, that's a big, big deal. He comes down off the mountain and his brother's having everybody worship this little golden calf. Just contrary to everything. And then Moses, of course, impulsively smashes the 10 Commandments. He wasn't supposed to do that. And then they're there. Now what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We're out here and idolatry has somehow seeped into who we're all about. I mean, the story just goes on and on. David kills Goliath. A few hours later now, what are we going to do? Okay, we killed the big guy, but there's still a whole army that we have to deal with. Or David, when he's older, he has an affair with Bathsheba, and she's pregnant. And he kills her husband, Uriah. And now what are we going to do? How do you fix these messes that we're in? Or even with Jesus. Jesus ascends to heaven, and he's gone. And he's left instructions. Go evangelize the world. And here's 120 of them from Jerusalem, again, standing around, or maybe sitting, and saying, how are we supposed to do that? And he's not even here to help us. We're supposed to evangelize the whole world, and Jesus, he went back? I mean, how do you do these things? So today's circumstances, they're significant. They're large challenges. But every generation has faced significant, large challenges. Leadership has always been hard, and God has always been faithful. And the gates of hell have never prevailed against the Church of Jesus Christ. So whether we're talking about 2,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, God is there. And that has got to underpin everything that we think about how we deal with the challenges that are in our leadership and our generation. Okay, so I want to talk about 2 different lists, sort of to-do lists. List number 1, remember this is a classroom, is for leaders, especially those who are pastors. And list number 2 is a list for churches, which of course includes leaders and pastors. Okay, so here's my short list for leaders. The first one takes a little bit of explaining. Maybe I should personalize it. So I was pastor at Wooddale Church, now in Eden Prairie, for 35 years. And there are people that will sometimes say to me, so what's it like not being a pastor anymore? What's it like not preaching every weekend? What's it like not doing that? Because that's who you are. And I used to just shut up and swallow what they said. Now I tend to respond and say, that is not who I am. I do not see my primary identity in being a pastor or a teacher or my once upon a time profession of repairing mobile homes. If you have a mobile home, I know how to fix whatever you need fixed because that was my job. Those are things I did, but who I am, my identity is as a Christian and a disciple of Jesus Christ. And the way I and you, all of us as Christians, the way we live that out is in our personal identity in whatever situation we're in. So if I'm a pastor and I lose my job, or I'm a pastor and I retire, or I'm disabled, or then I need to, in that new circumstance, live out what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. But not to define myself by some title and some role, but define who I am in terms of my identification with Jesus Christ. I mean, that's what Paul did. Paul, he would say, I'm a Jew, I'm a Roman. I mean, he had all these different labels that could be attached to him. But when it came down to his identity, he said, for me to live is Christ. For me to live is Christ. Sometimes I'm in prison, sometimes I'm not in prison. Sometimes I'm speaking to people in the language of the Jews, and sometimes I'm speaking to people in the language of the Romans. How do I then get that identity? All right, I want to talk to you a little bit about Lake Superior. So Lake Superior is the largest surface water lake in the world. Lake Superior has 10% of all of the surface water in the world. I mean, it is an enormous, amazing, amazing lake. Now, if you live in Minnesota, the chances are good that you've probably been and visited there. You probably didn't swim much, but you at least took a picture and looked at it. And many Minnesotans have visited the Split Rock Lighthouse, which is on the way from Duluth to Canada. If you go there, you'll first walk into a visitor's reception area, a gift shop, and you walk through it, and then you get to the lighthouse. If you do this, you will see a display in this reception area, and it's a long wooden box that has on it a map of the western shore, or the north shore, of Lake Superior. And it's a hands-on display. And in it is a wooden boat. And you can move it. You can put your hand on the wooden boat and you can move it around. And in the middle of the boat is a compass. And the needle points to the N, north. So you then say, I'm going to take this boat and I'm going to take it up the coast of Lake Superior from Split Rock or from Duluth up to Thunder Bay and up to Canada. And watch what happens. Keep following it north, and you will drive that little boat right into the shoreline. You will hit the rocks, and if you're actually navigating, you will sink the boat. That's because there you cannot trust a compass. Because the Iron Range of northern Minnesota has so much iron in the ground that it moves the needle to say what we know to be west is actually north. So you can't trust a compass along the shore of Lake Superior. And as a result, and you can see from this map, there have been numerous sinkings of boats because they've hit the rocks. A lot of those boats we still can't find to this day. So what did they do, or what did they do? We're talking 100 years ago. What they did was they abandoned navigating with a compass. And they decided the only way to actually know where true north was to look at the North Star. Because it wasn't bent by iron in the Minnesota soil, it always pointed north. And as long as you could navigate by the North Star, then you were going to be okay. Jesus stated that he's the light of the world. He is stable, he is fixed, he is dependable, he is trustworthy. If we navigate by compasses of changing contexts and culture, we're going to end up in the rocks. And we can't trust the fluctuations within our context and culture. So instead, we fix our navigation on Jesus Christ, who is our North Star. All right, so second on my list for leaders has to do with multiple roles. You know, if you have enough money or have a lot of money and you have a financial counselor, I'm told that they will advise you to diversify. That is, don't put all your money in a single stock or even in a single mutual fund or even in a single bank. What you do is spread it out so if something goes wrong, you don't lose everything and you spread it around. I would say that blessed are pastors, healthy pastors, who have something else that they're engaged in besides being a pastor. For me, it was a turning point when, as a young pastor in my 20s, in a church of 100-some in Colorado, I also started teaching. And, the way it works out, and actually have sort of been bivocational most of my life, but the way it works out is you preach a crummy sermon on Sunday morning, and then you go to school on Monday or Tuesday, and they say you are the best teacher I've ever had. Life's a whole lot better. It's a whole lot better. Or you have a student that comes and says, you gave me a C and I deserved an A, and I'm writing a letter of protest to the head of the school, and going to get you fired. And then you go back to church, and after the service, somebody shakes your hand and said, that's the best sermon I've ever heard. That's the best sermon I ever heard. I had a guy in our congregation who said that to me every Sunday for over 30 years, which made me wonder about the first one, that it was better than he had ever heard before. But the point here is, it is multiple roles. It doesn't have to be a second job. It can be a hobby. It can be a sport. It can be a set of relationships. But don't invest everything in the identity of being a pastor and a church leader. It is important. It is valuable. It is essential. It is wonderful. But to do a good job there, it is often helpful to have another outlet and another connection. The third on this leaders list has to do with mentors, and especially having multiple mentors. So it's diversification again, but those who have one hero, if something goes wrong with that hero, you're often in trouble. So having backups, multiple heroes, is a good thing. So I have my own definition of a mentor. A mentor is someone that you get to know so well that you could predict what that person would do in a situation that person has never been in. You just know what she would say. You know what he would do. You know them so well. So get multiple mentors. How do you pick them? Pick somebody you like. Pick someone you'd like to be like. And then you say, well, that doesn't mean they'll do it. Well, ask them. If they say no, actually, if they say no, you can still count them as a mentor. They just don't think that way of you. But you can do that. And get together with them once a month. Or if you live here and they live in California or they live in New York, then you get together with them once a year. Or it's by phone, or it's online. And you learn from that person over an extended period of time, and you build that relationship. They don't even have to be alive. You can choose a mentor who's been dead for 100 years. When I was a pastor in Colorado, I took out and read every biography in the Denver Seminary Library, every one of them. I went back years later, took some of them off the shelf. I was the only one that had ever checked some of them out. I read them all, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot from Augustine, from Calvin, from Spurgeon, from people that have been dead for hundreds of years. And it's getting to know them so well that I could predict how they would respond to a situation now, 1,000 years later, or more than that, even though they're not here. They're not doing that. Fourth and last on this first list has to do with peers. And that is getting to know your peers. That is, others who are pastors in your community or nearby and have circumstances and contexts similar to your challenges and to your opportunities. So it means forging a small group or joining a small group that's already there. And you meet regularly and you pray together and you tell stories and you ask for advice. You visit their churches, you visit their homes, you have times together as families. You live and you learn. In other words, you don't go it alone. You're in this with somebody else. And the Bible is full of this, full of these biographies. Moses, he didn't do it alone. He had Aaron, he had Joshua. David had Jonathan. Jesus had a best friend named John. These people weren't doing it alone, these great leaders of Scripture. And these peers, these other people in similar circumstances, they can be enormous encouragement. They've been where you are, or they understand in a way that no one else does. For, 25 years, I was in a small group with Tim Power, who was the priest at Pax Christi Catholic Community in Eden Prairie. And, I mean, obviously we had differences. I'm a Protestant, he's a Catholic, and that's kind of a big difference. He, in his ministry, dealt with some breathtakingly difficult examples of people in the congregation who were killed in plane crashes, tragic circumstances, front-page news stories. And I learned that when someone in the church faced a dire situation and they were looking to me as the pastor and I didn't know how to do it, I didn't know how to deal with it, that if I called Father Tim, he would give me the best advice that I could get from anybody. It's having those kinds of peers. All right, so if you do everything I've just suggested, will that answer every question for now what and leading into the future? Well, perhaps not. But I think that these are time-tested realities that are of enormous and transformative benefit. Okay, let's go to a second list with some more ideas. This is a list for churches, including leaders. So let's start out with purpose. Purpose is a clear, simple statement of what is the purpose of the church. So there are only 6 questions, right? Who, what, where, why, when, and how. There isn't another question. That's all the questions there are in any language, any time. There are only those questions. So if someone says, what is the most important question? And some of us would say, it's the who question. And if you get the right person as the leader of the church, you get the right person running a ministry, if you have the right person teaching a class, if you have the right persons who are major donors, if you have the who, then everything else will fall into place. Now, if Aristotle were here, the Greek philosopher, he would say, simple question, why is who the most important question? And you think, I'm not going to compete with Aristotle, so what? What's the most important question? What are we going to do in our church right now with the challenges we face? It's the what question, because we got to figure this out. What's next? And Aristotle, with a little more than a whisper, would say, why is what the most important question? Now, whether you agree with Aristotle or not, you would recognize that he would say, why is the most important question? Why does your church exist? Why has God put you where you are? And the answer is as different as the churches. Some will say, because there's no other church that speaks to the ethnic group within our area that speak the language that they speak. Others will say there's nobody else that is addressing the issues of injustice that are within our society. There's nobody else that has a service on Saturday night where disabled people can come where they can't get there otherwise on Sunday. So the purpose is going to vary depending on what the church is and where the church is. So it's defining that, it's understanding that, and it's a biblical concept. You ask John, why did you write the 4th gospel? John 20, he says, these things are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ and have life through him. He has a clear purpose statement for the 4th gospel. So blessed is the church that has a clear and simple purpose statement. So I mentioned before, I've a long time been a teacher, so I've had hundreds and thousands of students. And in certain leadership courses, one of the assignments I would give them was, for pastors, write a purpose statement for your church. And here's the rule. Everybody gets an A. Everybody has an A. And every punctuation mark, except for the final period, lowers you 1 grade. So you put in a comma, you put in a semicolon, you have 2 or 3 sentences, and you're around D or F or maybe G or H or whatever the grade is going to be. Because a workable, valuable purpose statement is easy to understand, it's easy to memorize, it's easy to put on the wall, it's easy to publish in a church publication. And it begins to permeate the understanding of everything that goes on in the life of the church. So at Wooddale Church in Eden Prairie, We worked hard on this. The purpose of Wooddale Church is to honor God by making more disciples for Jesus Christ. More disciples for Jesus Christ or of Jesus Christ? We actually contacted the senior English professor at the University of Minnesota to come and meet with our group and talk about the difference between of and for. But theologically, our primary purpose is not to make disciples of Jesus Christ. Of course we want to do that. We're doing this for Jesus Christ. We do this for him. And there's a theological underpinning to this. The purpose of Wooddale Church, it's one sentence, period at the end, is to honor God. That's to glorify God. Based upon the classical Greek etymology of the Greek word doxa, which is to glorify or glory, that's to enhance God's reputation. It's to make God look good. That's what we do. That's our job. That's our purpose. To enhance God's reputation, to make God look good. So I'll give you a current example. I'm retired. I'm no longer the pastor of Wooddale Church. Wooddale Church, the main campus, is in Eden Prairie. And the Eden Prairie School District, a couple times a year, puts out a magazine. And the current magazine has a major article in it on what the school district does when they have families in need. This is the superintendent of schools and the top administrators who are writing the article and are interviewed for this article. And what they said in the article is, when we have students and families in need, we call Wooddale Church for help. And it's my favorite part of this. And they always say yes. They always say yes. I think that makes God look good. I think that enhances God's reputation. I think that is the purpose of Wooddale Church, to honor God and make more disciples for Jesus Christ. All right, next on my list for churches has to do with the audience of the church. Who are we trying to reach and minister to? There's an old example for communicators. One of the things I used to teach was homiletics or preaching. And I would tell students this, certainly not original with me, but it goes like this. An amateur asks, "What should I say?" A professional asks, "Who is my audience?" Now, that is not to say that the gospel of Jesus Christ and the Bible are not all important. They obviously are. But if you misread your audience, if you speak English and your audience only speaks Mandarin or Aztec or Spanish, and you proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ and teach the scriptures, and they don't understand anything you've said because you didn't understand the audience, then you've totally wasted your time and you've compromised the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's, again, a biblical principle. The first three Gospels in the New Testament are very similar to each other. They're called the synoptics. They're synonymous. They're Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're similar. So 95% of Mark is already in the Gospel of Matthew. So if you read through the New Testament, you read Matthew and you start reading Mark and Luke, you say, "I just read this." And you're right, you did just read this. But they were targeted on different audiences. Matthew was written to a Hebrew audience. There's lots of allusions to the Old Testament. And someone who's a Gentile and hadn't read the Old Testament, they're going to have trouble getting it. So John Mark wrote the Gospel according to Mark. And it doesn't have all these Old Testament references. So it's a different audience. And Luke, unlike the other Gospels and most of the New Testament, doesn't start out in the common language, the Koine Greek. It starts out in classical Greek. Luke is targeting a more educated, literate audience than are Matthew and Mark. So the same gospel, same truth, but recognizing the different audiences that they're addressing and to which they are speaking. It's what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 9. He becomes all things to all people. Are you a slave? I'm a bondservant of Jesus Christ. Oh, you're not a slave, you're free. Then I'm a Roman citizen and I am as free as any man. If you're rich, I become rich. If you're poor, I become poor. If you're weak, I'm weak. If you're strong, I'm strong. I become all things to all people in order to win them to Jesus Christ. Effective churches know their communities very well. So I can talk to a pastor and say, who lives in your community? They can tell you how many single mothers there are, percentage-wise, how many divorces there are per year. They can tell you the average age in the community. They can tell you about income and education. They can tell you about who are needy and who is not. They can tell you about different zip codes and different neighborhoods because they know their audience. And then the ministry is driven to relate to that audience. So I was invited to speak to a conference, a large conference of church planters. And it was a dinner, and I'm seated at the table next to this guy I'd never met, and it's before I'm up to speak, and they're all church planters, so I assumed he was a church planter, and I said, wow, it's really hard to start a new church, to be a church planter. He said, oh yeah, it's really hard. I said, so, I'm being empathetic, sympathetic. I said, so how's it going? He said, well, it was really hard, but it's gotten easier since we passed the 3,000 mark in attendance. And so I decided it's time to change the subject. So I said, well, what kind of music do you have in your church? Well, we have hoedown worship. And maybe that means something to you. I don't even know how to spell it. I had no idea what is hoedown worship. So I figured it's time to change the subject again, because I didn't know how to talk about that. And I said, well, are you a musician? Long pause. He said, my college degree is in classical organ performance. I said, do they know? He said, oh, I would never tell them. I would never tell them. Understand, this guy is a highly educated and trained classical musician, but his audience related to hoedown worship. So he set aside what was his preference in order to reach the people that God had called him to. And the point, to me at least, is that that's just like Jesus. You know, John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in verse 14, and the Word became flesh. God became human to be like us, because this was his audience. Or as Paul wrote, though he was rich, the Son of God, rich? That's sort of an understatement, isn't it? Rich, he's God. Though he was rich, for our sakes he became poor. He left the riches of heaven because his audience was poor. His audience was us. Effective churches have a clear definition of their audience, and they know that audience really, really well. And that shapes what time the services are and how you dress and how you teach and how you relate to people in the community and who you know. And you can't reach everybody. And that's a challenge, so you narrow it down and say, this is the audience that God has called us to, and we're going to trust God that another church is going to reach another audience in our city that we are not called to. The third on my list has to do with resources. What do you do if the resources aren't what you need? You take an inventory. Your inventory has a building or doesn't have a building. It has a place to meet or rent or no building at all. You have staff or you don't have a salary enough to pay a staff. It's how much money you have and whether you have debt and what is the technology. And what if it doesn't line up? What if you say, this is our purpose and this is our audience, and the resources aren't there to do what we believe God is calling us to do? And that calls, in my opinion, for prayer and for creativity. As a young pastor, we didn't have much money in the church. We didn't have a lot of people in the church. And there were all kinds of things that needed to be done just to run the church. There was a guy in the church who had retired from the furniture business, and he had done pretty well. And I said to him, I'd like to have you join the staff, and you can become our business manager, and you can run the business operation of the church and the facilities. and we'll pay you a salary. He said, how much? I said, $1 a year. He said, okay, full-time, $1 a year. He never actually claimed it, so it ended up being a pretty good bargain. Same church. We couldn't afford a secretary and administrative assistant. We had a farmer in the church. He got married for the first time in his 60s to a woman, first-time marriage, in her 60s. This was in Colorado. She had moved from Chicago, and she had worked her entire life as an administrative assistant in companies, including nonprofits, and she wanted to work. She liked to work. And he said, I'm the man, and I will support you, and you are not going to get a job where you have to bring in money. I said, I've got the answer. I have got the answer. You can work full-time for the church, and we promise we will never pay you anything. And her husband said, okay, we can do that. So she worked full-time for nothing. She was skilled. So is that repeatable? Probably not. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it is. You go after the resources that you need, and sometimes you'll have a church where the church leadership, the church board doesn't have some of the skills they're needed. You need somebody who's really good at finance, and you don't have anybody that has that skill level. So I can tell you about churches that go and borrow a board member from another church. Ask them to come, or her, for a year, or 6 months, or 2 years, and be a non-voting member of the board. And we'll give you back to your other church after a while. But this is the help that we need. So it's utilizing resources in creative ways. Fourth on my list has to do with models, and again, multiple models. It is finding other churches that were where you are now and then moved to where you would like to go. I don't mean physically, but in terms of effective ministry. So let's say you're a church of 300 that is declining at 7% per year, and you don't have newcomers. So what you do is start searching, and by the way, set up a team of volunteers to do it. If they won't, then you do it yourself. You go online, and frankly, this would take a day or two. It's not a huge task. And you find other churches within the Twin Cities or in Minnesota or anywhere in the country. You find other churches that 5 or 10 years ago were churches of that same size, declining at 5 or 10% per year, not reaching any new people and aging out of business. And then look at their website, get as much information as you can, call the pastor, call and talk to leaders in the church, interview people over the phone, put together a few sheets that describe it. Do this until you develop 12 churches that once were where you are and have gone to where you would like to go. And then go visit 2 of them. I would say the farther away they are, the better it is. What you do is borrow or rent a van that seats at least 12 people, and pick 12 of the most influential people in the church. Sometimes the most influential people in the church are board members and staff people. Sometimes they're not. There are other people in the congregation, but people that influence others. Put them in that van, go and spend a weekend in that church. Go to services, go to small groups, interview people, check out everything you possibly can, and then drive home. If the drive home is 12 hours, that's good. If it's 15 hours, it's better, because the transformation takes place on the ride home. Because on that ride home, someone says, well, we could never do that. Just look, they have a nicer building than we have. And somebody in the back says, they didn't have a nice building when they started doing this. Oh yeah, they didn't. They didn't. And suddenly that group of 12 or 15 people, they become coalesced. They have a vision, and then they go back to all the relationships within the church, and they say, we know where they did this, and we can do this too. So it is finding those models. Fifth on my list, and the last on this list, has to do with outreach. So let me tell you that new churches, I love new churches. Wooddale churches now, we have 31 daughter churches. And new churches, when they first begin, for the most part, are very outreaching. You know why? They need people and they need money. and you need to reach out and get new people in order to increase your numbers and increase the budget. Until churches reach an average worship attendance of about 125. Because when churches reach 125 in attendance, give or take, they have enough money to have a place to meet and to pay a pastor, if not full-time, at least part-time. The 125 people know each other pretty well and socialize with each other. And they no longer need and often don't want, in spite of what they say, new people to come in and permeate their social systems, and we can do just fine without them. So that means that any church that passes that number is required to make a special effort, an especially strong effort, that will say this is who we are going to be as an outreaching church. Looking outward changes. So what looking outward looked like 10 and 20 years ago is not necessarily what looking outward is like today. And for example, if you go back 20 years, well, even just especially pre-pandemic and pre-web pages for churches, if you go back, people that were looking for a church would typically go and send scouts. They would send a husband or a wife or an older child, go visit the church and come back and tell us what you saw. They don't do that anymore because they can look it up online. And they can do their scouting from a distance and not in person. So that means it's a different approach. And we need to be adapting in every way we can to how we do that. By the way, so I work in consulting with churches. I find some churches, independent of size, are really good at their websites. Some smaller churches, they're just spectacular how well they're done. And there are other churches, honestly, they're terrible. I've had times when I want to watch a service online, and well, I've done this a lot. I can't figure out how to do it. I can't find a place to connect. I've wanted to contact churches, and they don't put their address on their website. I think, how are you supposed to get there? I want to know something about the pastor. And there's no biographical information, or if there is a biographical information, it tells about the pastor's dog. I don't really care about the pastor's dog. I want to know what this pastor does or went to school or where that pastor lives. I want some more information. And so getting that information is part, and giving that information is part of all of this outreach. And churches need to continually update and review. Blessed is the church where the pastor and key people watch the video of their own service every week after that service and try to do it from the perspective of an outsider. Ideally, bring an outsider in, stop somebody on the street and have them watch it and tell you what they think of what they just saw. And it morphs, it changes with each year and with each generation. I just saw a really good example, a video that just totally impressed me, of how a church changed and understood those changes and adapted to them over the years. It is the historical video of Cornerstone Church in Crystal. And if you haven't done this, go to the website for this church, go to About, and watch that video of the 80-some year history of what was Olivet Baptist Church and today is Cornerstone Church. There's one line that just really caught my attention. When the pastor said to the congregation, "We have always thought of ourselves as a suburban church, and now we realize we are an urban church." Seeing and understanding that difference, that's a profound thing to see and to understand. So it is true for all of our churches that we need to focus on what is that outreach. And from the outsider's point of view, you want to know what it feels like to be an outsider? Take a Sunday off and go to a Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall. Go to a Mormon ward or go to a Catholic Mass and feel what it's like when you don't know what to say or where to stand or who to talk to and how they treat visitors. And understand that's often the way it is for unchurched people when they come to any church. One last story. Every 4 years, when the Summer Olympic Games come around, every 4 years, we tend to rehear a story from the 1968 Summer Olympic Games in Mexico City, and especially the marathon in that 1968 Olympics. Mexico City is very high. It's the third highest world capital. The average altitude in Mexico City is 7,350 feet. So that's half again higher than Denver, Colorado. And for people that don't live there and they come in from the outside, it's hard to breathe at that altitude. In 1968, the marathon had Olympic runners from 75 countries. Only 57 of them finished the race. These are Olympic marathon runners, and there was a 34% dropout. It was hard. The winner was Memo Waldi of Ethiopia. He won the gold medal at 2 hours, 20 minutes, 16 seconds. The last runner came in more than an hour later at 3 hours, 25 minutes, 27 seconds. His name, John Stephen Aquari. He had fallen. He cut his leg. He dislocated his knee joint. And he kept running. And he kept running until, after 3.5 hours, he came into the stadium and he crossed the finish line. But pretty much everybody there had gone home. There weren't too many people there to see him win. A reporter came to him and said, "Why did you not quit?" And he said, "My country, Tanzania, sent me 10,000 miles, not just to start the race, but to finish the race." That's who we are. That's us for Jesus' sake. Jesus has sent us to his church. He sent us to start, but he also sent us to finish, all for Jesus' sake. All right, we have some time left, and I don't know how we go about doing that, but just remember it's a classroom, and I'm going to give you a grade, so ask nice questions.
Give Leith an applause of thanks. Thank you for a very, very practical and inspirational shot this morning. We appreciate that. Our Associate Director, Matt Stacy, will take the Phil Donahue position.
I was hoping to have a good rapport with people.
I'm coming down where you are.
Oh, you're going to come down with me. We want to give you just a couple minutes time to interact with him. So, what do you have for